So my name is Kristine Kaliebe, and as far as the history of my weight and how I felt about my body goes, both of my sisters were naturally thin. My mother was naturally thin, and I was always the heavier sister. I wouldn't say overweight, but definitely always chubby, and struggled with it, tried every diet in the book. It wasn't until I was dealing with health issues that I came across the lifestyle of intermittent fasting, and I incorporated that, saw significant changes, and then started doing grain-free and sugar-free to really just utilize the detoxification part of intermittent fasting. I've always just done the 12 hours not eating. So essentially I found that for me, stopping carbohydrates especially, but when I started doing intermittent fasting, I essentially switched off the eating around 6, 7 p.m. and until 6 or 7 in the morning, there's no eating. And it was insane. I actually had to shorten those hours to 8 at times because I would lose so much weight, like uncontrollably losing weight, but still eating tons. It was just my body was in fasting mode enough to deplete the fat cells. So
awesome,
because you're either in fasting or fed, and when you're in constant fed mode, if we're to go by the recommendations that they give us, the fed mode is you can only store so much glycogen in your liver. So once that's there, it's converting it to fat. And if you're not going into fasting mode intermittently, then you're going to constantly be in a process of storage and not depletion, which will then obviously lead to weight gain. Where I start eating on the hunger scale for me is obviously I do it by time. So when I wake up in the morning 6 or 7 and my body's just automatically up at that time, sometimes I don't feel hungry, so I don't eat until 11 or so. And even when doing that, I don't extend my eating hours at night because when I eat carbs past like 6 or 7, it's just too much for me. So I would say I don't ever really get into that ravenous hungry mode. I don't feel that. I don't ever feel like I'm super hungry.
So would you say that you eat when you're hungry, just not ravenously hungry?
Mm-hmm.
So
I would say I get to the hunger point, like so when we're here.
0 is ravenously hungry.
Right.
1 is you actually hear your stomach growl. 2 is you're hungry.
I would say I eat when the stomach growling happens. Sometimes I have to remind myself to eat because I think once you get in that mode and you're healthy and you're fueling your body with food and not eating food because it's yummy or it's fixing some sort of, quick fix in the chemicals in your brain, so you're like getting those little boosts of energy. I don't think you get to the point where you're, these ravenous hungry. So I would say stomach growling and hungry. 1 and 2 is like always the extent of it. I stop eating when I'm comfortable. I just want to feel satiated. I don't want to feel uncomfortable. And when I eat too much, I feel uncomfortable. When you're paying attention to what you're eating, you can start noticing like, okay, I'm getting just slightly uncomfortable. It's just like the most minute amount of discomfort. So I feel like I can lengthen the hours of eating because I eat so clean. So not only is it grain-free and sugar-free, it's organic, and that's huge. People don't consider the toxic factor of their food and why they're retaining weight. And I think that's a huge portion of it. Even if you can't cut out grain and sugar, if that's too hard for you, if you're taking out the toxic load in the food that you put into your body, I think that makes a huge difference in what your body hangs on to. So when I'm craving sugar, which I have to say is rare, I think initially it was hard. And so in the initial periods of avoiding sugar, the cravings, the best thing is cinnamon on an apple. There is something in that snack that cures a sugar craving for me like no other. It's got all of the qualities of like a cinnamon toast, but then you've got that filling fiber from the apple. So I think that's like when I'm craving sugar. And now I would consider an apple sugar. That's how much I don't crave sugar anymore. Is an apple to me would be sweet enough. A banana is like what I used to consider ice cream. My diet consists of unprocessed foods. So if it's going to come in a box, it better only have 2 or 3 ingredients. And I need to know how they were put together. You know, ingredients that I can't understand don't go in my body. I literally put in my body the cleanest of foods. And the simplest way to describe it is the outside of the grocery store aisles. So, you know, if you're sticking to the outside, you really don't need to go in the center aisles. I made a video of the grocery store and I went through the center aisles and it was nothing but starch and sugar and processed foods and foods I couldn't understand and chemicals my body doesn't even recognize as food, you know. So what's the fruits, vegetables? If I'm to eat any sort of grain, it will be the sprouted grain bread, and that's the limit of my grain is sprouted grain. So dairy is something I love. Who doesn't love dairy, right? But I apply those same rules that I apply to the grocery store to dairy. So it needs to be clean. It needs to be unprocessed, that's the only thing that's hard is cheese. So cheese is hard to find really clean. You have to qualify it usually with somebody who's making their own cheese on a farm, goat cheese or something like that. Dairy needs to be, for me, grass-fed cows, because obviously if the cows are eating grain, then so am I. And if I can get it from a local farmer, that's what I prefer to do. When the milk started being pooled in our country, that's when we started seeing the rise of inflammation and inflammatory diseases. There's so much pooling of our milk, so that if you have a diseased cow, it's being pooled with almost our entire lot of dairy, you know, for the country. That's crazy. That wasn't what we were exposed to 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's different now. And our bodies are having trouble and they're showing signs of it. Food for comfort that I would say I rely on, and along with that, the dairy needs to be organic. I do feel that's important, and antibiotic-free, hormone-free. So I wrestle with this because everybody wants to say, we all need comfort food. That's a normal thing. I like to say you can get rid of that feeling. The feeling that you need comfort food doesn't need to be there. The reason I think we call it comfort food because it does feel comforting. Starchy foods, carbohydrates, sweets, you know, when I think comfort food, I think of like either mashed potatoes or like a donut, something like that. Those foods are yeast feeders. If you can get rid of the yeast in your body, you can get rid of the call for the food for it. It is, my dad and I had a conversation recently, and we were talking about who knew sugar and yeast had such a voice. Who knew, you know? When you can beat the candida in your body, you can beat a myriad of issues on top of the call for comfort food. That call that's like, that would be so good. I'd love to just wrap up in a blanket and eat it. You know, that feeling is strong because without it, the yeast dies. Without the food for itself, it dies. And so when you can starve it out by your own demand, by your own control, you can literally quiet the voice. Mm-hmm. So that's my answer for comfort food. Yeah. I do eat meat. I spent a long time being a vegan. And the veganism, actually, I will say, was a huge catalyst for this lifestyle, because veganism included clean eating and not subjecting myself to the other diseases and chemicals that other animals were exposed to. You know, so when you incorporate what other beings are exposed to, you're essentially bringing that on yourself. So now I do eat meat. It does need to be, what I love to do is get in with another family and purchase part of a cow. Mm-hmm. Go in, you know, and let's purchase a cow together, and then you have your meat for the year or for the half year, whatever you decide to do. But organic, grass-fed, and most importantly, the part where everyone's gonna think I'm crazy is handled with care. The animals I eat and put into my body should not have existed only to feed me. I feel that they should exist to live the life they were created to live. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, something magical happens that is almost of the godly realm and not explainable with words, because your meat has a different purpose. So I definitely eat with purpose. The food that I put in my body should be from an animal that lived its life in a happy way.
It's kind of like the vegan coming out.
Yeah. And you know, it has so much less to do with you have to be kind to animals. Yes, you should be kind to every being, but it has to do with, you know, the intention. God created those animals to have their little life, you know? And are they to then feed us? Absolutely, that's written about, and you know, that's wonderful. But at the same time, it shouldn't be a miserable existence, stressed out, coursing with cortisol, and you know, you take that on, you take all of that on. And if anyone wants to see the proof in that, look at a regular egg versus a farm egg. A handled hen's egg is entirely colorful and buttery and orange, and an unhandled hen's egg is actually sturdier, paler in color, and has much less taste. So a lot of people are buying cage-free, and I would implore you, go look at a cage-free facility. It's not what you think. They're still not getting sunshine. Sunshine is crucial. We were given access to sunshine that's super cleansing, full of vitamins, you know. The cage-free, the facilities, they're just roaming free inside. But when you say free range, then you're talking about hens that have access to the outdoors. And then when you add in handled, these are hens that have been loved.
Yeah.
It's crazy, I know. It sounds crazy, but it's so true.
We should love animals.
We should. I mean, really, there's so much. They have a beating heart for a reason, you know. But processed meats, terrible. I can't even, I wouldn't touch them if it were going to save me from starvation, most likely. I mean, processed meats, anytime you're dealing with an animal who died under massive stress, would you take a dose of cortisol? If I gave you right now a pill that had a stress hormone in it, I doubt anyone would take it, yet we feed it to ourselves daily and wonder why we're stressed out, why we're inflamed, why we're, you know, putting weight on. And that's another thing about the intermittent fasting is when you're in a fasting mode, which can be anywhere from 12 to 18 hours or whatever length of time you want it to be, those hours, your body can go through what's called autophagy, which is cell death and regeneration, much like working out. So when you work out and you're destroying that muscle fiber that rebuilds, that's why you get muscle from working out. Without the protein, it wouldn't work. And with this cell death during fasting, they rebuild stronger. And if you're putting in clean food, those rebuilt cells are going to be perfectly operational. You know, they're not going to be stressed out. They're not going to be struggling. They're not going to be sluggish. They're going to be perfectly operational. So it is a cycle. People want to give up so quick, but it's like you've got to let your cells start regenerating and then feed them, you know, feed them what's going to build a nice healthy cell. So for instance, I'm grain-free, sugar-free. I only eat in certain time windows. And like I said, I'm not ravenously hungry. Who doesn't love Thanksgiving? I mean, the thought of dressing, you know, and stuffing and sweet cranberry sauce and all of those things are awesome. But I also don't like to feel bad. So I eat like everybody else on Thanksgiving and don't pay a price afterwards because I'm not gluttonously piling it in. I like to enjoy it. If it's there the next day, I'll have some the next day. Whatever really feels intuitive. And I think that when you start eating this way and you're eating clean and you're feeding your body and fueling the vessel you've been given, you literally start to have an intuition, a discernment that's given. I mean, I do pray for that too, so we'll put that in there. I do pray for discernment often, but I think it also comes with being a fully functioning being. Now all of a sudden I have this intuition about what I should be eating. And it's easy to say, I'm good. I got my little fill, I got my little, you know. And it's not a struggle, I swear to you, not a struggle. Like I don't ever once feel like I'm missing anything, and it's not a struggle ever. So let's say you are going into the holidays and you're either new to trying to get on top of the way that you handle food going into your body, or you're wanting to incorporate, you know, this season in your new mind frame, whatever the case may be. I feel like we all have that ability to discern. We all have that ability to say, hey, I'm going to go into this with open eyes. I'm going to go into this with an open mind and an open heart. And I have a goal that I want to meet. So let's reverse engineer that goal and say, you know, after Thanksgiving, I'd like to feel good about myself. I'd like to feel good about myself, and I'd like to feel good in my skin. What does that look like? Well, if you reverse engineer that, that looks like not stuffing yourself to the point where you have to unbutton your pants. Recognizing those first cues of, I'm full. Giving yourself 20 minutes after a normal plate to see if you want a second plate. You know, those little things are something anybody can do. It's the little extra steps, the little details that sort of give you that boost of confidence that will then come into play in the next week, and the next week, and the next week, because you're setting your daily goal, your hourly goal, and you're reverse engineering it, and you're figuring out, how does this work? How does this fit into my holiday plan? You can still sit there with Uncle Joe and have your stuffing. You know, you just don't have to out-eat Uncle Joe. And it still tastes good, and you can eat slower. And a huge thing is, chew your food. Chew every single bite of food. And if you don't have time to give thanks for every bite, give thanks for every other bite. And wow, I'm so grateful that I'm being fed, number one, that I'm sitting here with family, number two. There are so many other ways to satiate those chemicals in the brain. It doesn't need to be stuffing, you know, or turkey and dressing. It can be, I am grateful that I'm putting this food in my mouth and I have food to eat. And it sounds crazy, like that eliminates the struggle. When you're mindful about the way that you eat, when you're mindful about the chewing you do, when you're mindful about the food you're putting in your body, and how you may have it and another may not, those bites become longer and you feel fuller, and it's like magic. It just works like magic. It does.